Chosen one. Hear the dry scrape of dust under a worn shell and the sharp thump of fast feet cutting across the road like they already own the day. That is how some victories begin. Not with applause, but with a sound nobody respects until God turns it into a testimony. There was a little path edged with brittle grass, warm under the sun, and a crowd gathered there because the scene looked obvious. The hare stood in that heat with bright eyes, quick breath, and that restless energy people confuse with destiny. He laughed out loud at the tortoise, a full public mockery. He looked at that slow-moving creature and saw an easy target. He saw delay and called it weakness. He saw a careful step and called it a joke. And because pride always wants witnesses, he challenged the tortoise to a race. Now listen to me closely, chosen one. The insult was never just about speed. It was deeper than that. The swift one needed the slower creature beneath him so he could feel taller in his own reflection. That is what insecure spirits do. They build their confidence on comparison. They crown themselves too early. They need a crowd to agree that the one moving with a steady, unbroken pace could never threaten the overconfident sprint. But the tortoise did something holy. It accepted. No shouting, no speech, no argument. Just acceptance. The kind that makes arrogant voices even louder, because calm agreement unsettles people who were hoping to pull chaos out of you. And the onlookers? Oh, they leaned in with that look people get when they think they already know the ending. To them, this was entertainment. To heaven, it was a mirror. Because God will sometimes allow a challenge that looks unfair, just so truth can walk into the open where everybody can see it. The race had not started yet, but the judgment already had. The hare was grinning. The tortoise was still. The finish line was waiting. And before the first step was taken, one of them had already lost something no speed could buy back. If this speaks to your spirit, like the video and subscribe, because what the hare said next in front of everybody would make the silence at the end feel even heavier. And that heavier silence begins with the next revelation, chosen one. The mocker was not just fast. He was addicted to being seen as fast. The hare circled a few steps before the tortoise, kicking up little bursts of dust, ears high, chest full, savoring the sound of his own confidence. You could almost feel the heat rising off the ground between them. He did not challenge that quiet creature because he needed a race. He challenged him because he needed agreement. He wanted every eye nearby to confirm the same story he had already told himself, that speed was a crown, and whoever moved with care had no right to stand beside him. So he kept talking. He laughed at the shell. He mocked the short steps. He tossed out that kind of easy cruelty proud hearts love to use when they think the ending is already locked in. And the tortoise just stood there, feeling the grit under his feet, blinking in the hard daylight, not shrinking, not rushing to defend himself. That stillness bothered the hare more than any insult ever could have. Because when someone refuses to perform their hurt for a crowd, the crowd starts losing control of the story. That is your mirror right there, chosen one. Some people become loud around you because your calm exposes them. They call your steady, unbroken pace weakness because they cannot imagine strength without noise. They think peace means passivity. They think restraint means fear. But God will let a proud voice talk long enough to reveal its own emptiness. The animal with all the flash kept trying to turn the moment into theater. The one under the shell kept turning it into witness. Then came the agreement. The course stretched ahead in plain sight. Packed earth, a bend near a shaded patch, the faint mark of the goal far off where the path narrowed. The hare looked at that distance and smirked, like it had already bowed to him. The tortoise looked at the same road and gave it the only thing heaven ever really blesses: attention. One of them saw a stage, the other saw an assignment. And when they finally moved toward the starting point, the crowd pressed closer, already smiling at what they were sure would be a short race, not realizing pride had just taken the first step toward its own humiliation. So they took their places, and the air itself seemed to lean forward. The ground was hot now, carrying that dry, sun-baked smell of dirt and weeds. The hare lowered himself like a coiled spring, muscles tight, eyes bright with the thrill of proving what he thought needed no proof. A few feet away, the tortoise settled into himself, shell catching a dull stripe of light, legs planted with quiet certainty. Chosen one, this is where many people misread the whole matter. They think the contest starts when movement starts. For souls, the race begins at the place of posture. One of them was already chasing the praise wrapped around the result. The other was simply prepared to honor the road. Then the signal came. The fast one burst forward so hard that dust jumped behind him in a pale cloud. In moments, he was already far ahead, cutting down the path with that smooth, arrogant ease that makes a crowd nod and say, "See, we told you." The tortoise began the same way he had stood. No sudden burst, no panic, no performance. Just step and step again. The space between them widened almost immediately, and you could feel the crowd relax into its own assumptions, because people love early evidence that flatters their opinions. But God will let appearances speak first when He plans for truth to speak last. The hare glanced back once and saw what he wanted to see. Distance. The kind that feeds pride. The kind that whispers, "You were right to laugh." He even slowed for a heartbeat, almost playful, savoring the overconfident sprint, as if the path itself had already surrendered. Meanwhile, behind him, the smaller creature kept pressing forward, shell warm, feet scraping earth, holding to that old hidden law heaven never gets tired of proving. Endurance outlasts speed. That is what the mockers around you never understand, chosen one. They worship momentum when God is measuring faithfulness. They bow to whoever looks ahead first. They hand out crowns in the opening stretch, then act wounded when heaven takes them back. The path bent farther on, toward that patch of shade everyone could see from a distance. And when the hare looked ahead and noticed it, something shifted in his face. Not fear, not caution, something far more dangerous. It was the look of someone who had stopped respecting the road. That patch of shade sat just off the path, cool and dark under a broad tree, with the smell of dry bark and crushed leaves resting in the air. The hare reached it still far ahead, sides barely heaving, paws hardly marked by effort. He turned his head, looked back down the course, and saw the tortoise still working through the heat, small against the long stretch of earth. And right there, chosen one, pride made its quiet decision. Just that inward shrug that says, "I have so much advantage, I can afford to dishonor the process." He stepped off the track. He drifted toward that shade because he believed the distance behind him would protect him from consequence. He stretched out where the ground was cooler, where the tree roots pushed through the soil like old knuckles, and he let that smug certainty settle over him like a blanket. The crowd, still scattered along the path, took it as another sign of power. Of course he could rest, they thought. Of course he had time. That is how deception works. It wears the face of ease. But heaven never confuses carelessness with authority. The tortoise kept coming. Same scrape of feet, same measured breath, same shell carrying the sun on its back. No one had to announce him. No one had to defend him. He did not know anything about speeches or image management. He only knew the next step. And that is what some people cannot understand about you, chosen one. They think because you are not racing to prove yourself, you must not be moving with purpose. They mistake your restraint for delay when God is using it to keep your spirit clean. Meanwhile, the one in the shade folded deeper into comfort, ears lowered, eyes eased shut. The overconfident sprint had turned into something worse than mockery: neglect. He believed the finish line would wait for him because talent had always made room for his laziness before. But this path was not impressed, and as the sleeping body settled against the roots, the tortoise drew closer to the place where arrogance had decided to lie down. Closer and closer he came, while the one who mocked him lay breathing in the cool shadow as if the race belonged to him by birthright. Two rhythms moved on that path now. One was the soft scrape, scrape of small feet against packed earth. The other was the slow, easy breath of sleep under the tree. The tortoise felt the heat pressing down on his shell, felt the rough grit under each step, and still he did not break his pattern. Chosen one, there is a kind of strength that never announces itself. It does not lunge. It does not glance around for approval. It just keeps answering the road. And because it makes so little noise, the careless often think it can be ignored. That was the mistake resting in the shade. The hare had given his gift more trust than he gave the path. That is what pride does when it grows unchecked. It starts treating discipline like something optional. It starts acting as if distance already covered can guarantee distance still ahead. Even asleep, he looked certain. Head lowered, limbs loose, a smugness still left in the shape of him, as though the nap itself were part of the performance. And some of the watchers, still standing along the way, had not yet fully understood what they were seeing. To them, this pause still looked safe, still looked clever, still looked like the privilege of someone too favored to fail. But the race does not bow to vanity. The tortoise reached the tree line at last. The light changed there. Sun glare gave way to a cooler dimness. The smell of leaves and dry roots rose from the ground. For the first time, the sleeping form and the patient traveler were side by side in the same patch of earth. No one had imagined that moment would come so soon. The difference that once seemed impossible had quietly narrowed, step by step, until there it was, undeniable, close enough to touch. And still the tortoise did not stop. He did not turn his head. He did not savor the sight. He did not wake the one there with a word or a nudge. That, too, is a holy thing, chosen one. When God begins exposing arrogance for you, you do not need to interrupt it. You just keep moving. Then, with one more small push forward, the shell edged past the sleeping body, and the race entered a new truth the crowd was not ready to face. That new truth did not arrive with thunder. It arrived with a quiet body moving past a sleeping one. The tortoise left the shade the same way he entered it, without drama. Cool earth gave way to hot ground again. Sunlight slid back across his shell. Behind him, under the tree, the hare still slept with the kind of ease that only pride can wear in the middle of an unfinished race. Chosen one, hear me well. Some people are most blind at the exact moment they think they are safest. They trust old advantage more than present reality. They lean on what carried them before and never notice the moment heaven stops letting yesterday's lead protect today's laziness. So the distance changed, little by little. The space between them began to belong to the one who kept honoring it. The tortoise did not suddenly become fast. That is not how this kind of vindication works. God did not turn him into a different creature to embarrass the mocker. He let him remain fully himself. And that is the part your doubters struggle with most. They can accept your rise if they can pretend you changed into something else. What unsettles them is when your same quiet faithfulness becomes the thing that overtakes them. Farther back, some of the watchers had started shifting where they stood. The heat still shimmered above the road. The smell of warm dust and dry grass clung to the air. But the mood had changed. Earlier, their faces had been loose with easy amusement. Now there was a tightening around the eyes, a pause before the smile, a little uncertainty they did not want to name. Because once the tortoise passed that tree, the road itself became a mirror. It showed the crowd that their confidence had been placed in appearance, not character. And still, he kept on. The finish line was nowhere close enough to touch yet, but it had become real in a different way now. It was not just a distant mark, waiting for the hare to claim it. It was a promise, drawing the tortoise forward, step after step, while the one who laughed remained behind in borrowed comfort. Then, from somewhere under the shade, there came the slightest stir, a twitch, a breath, the first hint that sleep might not hold forever. And here was the next revelation, chosen one. Sleep was starting to loosen its grip, but truth was already farther down the road. Back under the tree, the hare gave a small jerk, then another. A paw twitched against the roots. His ears shifted. The cool shade that had felt like reward a moment ago now held that strange stillness that comes right before panic finds its voice. Ahead of him, the tortoise kept moving through the heat, carrying the same plain rhythm that had once looked harmless. Only now, that rhythm was no longer behind the mocker. It was in front of him, claiming ground with every rough little scrape. Some of the watchers were beginning to notice it too. You could hear it in what had disappeared. The easy laughter was thinning out. The loose comments had faded. Even the air felt different, tight and dry, as though the path itself was waiting. Because when a crowd has invested in the wrong crown, silence starts arriving before confession does. They had praised the gift and ignored the character. They had cheered the flash and dismissed the weight of perseverance. But endurance outlasts speed, and once that truth starts showing itself, people become very quiet around their own bad judgment. The sleeping one lifted his head at last. For a second, he looked soft with confusion, eyes still clouded, body slow to gather itself. He glanced toward the track as if expecting the old picture to still be there, the shell far behind, the race safely under his control, the finish line waiting patiently for his return. But pride always suffers a rude awakening when reality refuses to honor its fantasy. Because what he saw was not the version of the race he had left behind. He saw the tortoise ahead of him. Chosen one, that moment right there is what your doubters never prepare for. They imagine you staying in the place where they last felt superior. They expect your quiet season to remain a permanent condition. They freeze you in their minds so they can keep feeling bigger. And then one day, they wake up to movement. Real movement. Movement they did not approve, did not predict, and now cannot stop. The hare's body tightened all at once. His breath sharpened. His eyes widened. The shade no longer felt safe. The road no longer felt owned. And as he pushed himself fully upright, one truth struck him harder than the sun ever had. The race had kept going without his ego. And once that truth hit him, the whole road changed shape. The hare sprang out from the roots with dust clinging to his side and sleep still dull around his eyes. The shaded patch that had felt soft a moment earlier now seemed small, almost accusing. He stared down the path, and there it was, the shell ahead, steady in the light, moving with no hurry and no hesitation. His chest started pulling in quicker breaths. His paws dug at the earth. Chosen one, this is what happens when pride wakes up late. It does not wake into peace. It wakes into shock because the picture in its head has already expired. He bolted forward. But this run was different from the first one. Earlier, the overconfident sprint carried mockery in it. Now, it carried fear. It showed in the harder strikes of his feet. See it in the way his body pushed too sharply, as if speed alone could erase the time he had handed away. He was still gifted, still fast, still capable of covering ground in great bursts. But panic does not wear like confidence. It burns rough. It makes every step feel like repayment. In front, the tortoise did not react. No turn of the head, no startled pause, no temptation to break his rhythm just because the noise behind him had changed. That is the holy divide, chosen one. When God teaches you to move by calling instead of comparison, the sudden movement of those who once dismissed you no longer controls your pace. The one ahead kept answering the road the same way he had from the start. Shell warm under the sun, feet scraping forward, eyes fixed where the path narrowed in the distance. And the watchers, they felt it now. Their certainty had gone thin. The same mouths that had welcomed the mockery were not so eager to speak. Some looked toward the rushing blur behind. Some looked toward the slower body in front. Their faces held that awkward stillness people wear when reality begins to rebuke them in public. Because they had not just misjudged the race, they had misjudged what kind of strength God was honoring. The gap was still there, yes, but it was not the gap they thought they understood. And as the hare drove himself harder under the hot open sky, the finish line finally came into view for both of them. Now that distant mark was not an idea. It was there, pale against the road ahead, waiting for whoever could honor it all the way through. The tortoise saw it first with the same calm he had given every other step. No burst of emotion, no change in rhythm. Just that steady, unbroken pace carrying him over hot dust and small stones, closer and closer to the line that everybody assumed belonged to someone else. Chosen one. This is the part many people miss when they watch a life God is lifting. They expect some dramatic transformation at the end. But often the final stretch looks just like the beginning. Same faithfulness, same discipline, same quiet refusal to be distracted. Behind him, the hare was closing ground, but not cleanly. There was uneven force in his movement now, paws striking hard, breath cutting sharp, dirt kicking up in frantic bursts. The speed was real, yes, but it no longer looked sovereign. It looked desperate. He had spent the early part of the race performing certainty. Now every stride admitted fear. And that reversal mattered because the crowd could see it. They were not watching a champion take his place. They were watching someone chase what he had treated as guaranteed. That is how false crowns slip, chosen one. The ones who laughed at your process often believe they can return at the last moment and reclaim the position they wasted. They imagine one loud burst can undo a season of neglect. But the road remembers. The path keeps count. And when God lets your obedience become visible, it is not something panic can simply outrun. The distance between them narrowed some, but not enough. The shell ahead remained unwavering, carrying that same plain dignity it had carried under the insults, under the sun, past the sleeping pride under the tree. The hare saw it. The watchers saw it. Even the earth seemed to witness it now. There was no more room for pretending that the one in front had stumbled there by accident. No, this had been earned in the quiet places, and still, neither of them had reached the finish line. The hare pushed harder, eyes fixed, body straining, as if sheer will could rewrite the middle of the story. The tortoise kept moving, each step small but unbroken. One was trying to recover a crown he had assumed was his. The other was nearing a line he had never once demanded, only approached. Then the space ahead shortened to just a few more lengths of ground, and the whole crowd stopped breathing. That held breath over the road was not just about who would arrive first. It was about whose truth could survive the last stretch. The tortoise kept going with the same small, faithful motion that had carried him through every wrong assumption placed on his back. The dirt was finer here, looser underfoot, and each step pressed a shallow mark into the path. The line ahead looked nearer now, bright in the heat, almost trembling in the air. Chosen one, this is how God unsettles people who judged you too early. He does not always change your pace before them. Sometimes he lets your consistency become so undeniable that their old opinion has nowhere left to stand. Behind him, the hare was gaining, but every gain cost him. His lungs worked hard now. His body, once easy and loose, had become all strain and urgency. He no longer raced from abundance. He was racing from regret. And that is a brutal thing to witness, because regret has speed, but it does not have peace. The same feet that once danced across the road in mockery were now pounding it like a plea. The same mouth that had laughed was shut tight. No more jokes, no more crowd work, just the sound of effort arriving late. The watchers could feel the weight of that. No one wanted to say aloud what was happening, because saying it would mean admitting they had placed their faith in the wrong thing. Their eyes moved back and forth between the shell ahead and the blur behind, and the silence around them grew almost physical. Chosen one. Some people only begin to understand your worth when the version of strength they admired starts unraveling in public. They do not know what to do when the one they called too slow becomes the mirror exposing how shallow their judgment was. Still, the one ahead did not waver. He did not quicken to show off. He did not falter because the pounding behind him was getting louder. He stayed true to himself. That is what makes this kind of vindication holy. It is not stolen. It is not forced. It is simply revealed. Now the line was only a short stretch away. The hare lowered himself and drove harder, desperate to reclaim what he believed should never have slipped beyond his reach. The tortoise lifted one more measured step, then another, the edge of victory close enough to feel. And in that burning moment, both of them knew the next few breaths would decide everything. Those breaths came fast now, hot in the sun, each one carrying more truth than either of them wanted to say out loud. The tortoise was close enough to the line to see the pale mark clearly through the shimmer of heat. Dust clung to the lower edge of his shell. The road under him had grown rougher, broken by tiny stones and shallow grooves, but he did not argue with any of it. He just kept pressing forward with that same calm obedience. Chosen one, there is something sacred about a creature that does not change character just because victory is near. No vanity, no last-minute show, just faithfulness, finishing what pride thought it could toy with. Behind him, the hare threw everything into the chase. His body stretched long and low, powerful still, but now shaken by urgency. Each stride ate up ground, yet every stride also testified against him, because speed without discipline had finally met consequence. The one who had once laughed in the open air was now silent, except for breath and impact. And that silence around him was different from the silence gathering around the crowd. His was the silence of fear. Theirs was the silence of recognition. They could see it. They could see the one they had crowned too soon, straining to repair a mistake no one could deny anymore. They could see the creature they had dismissed still moving with dignity, still refusing to break into panic, still refusing to become somebody else just because pressure had risen behind him. That is how heaven exposes shallow judgment, chosen one. Not by noise, but by contrast. One becomes a mirror of desperation. The other becomes a mirror of steadiness. Now the gap was painfully small. The hare could almost taste the dust the tortoise was stirring up ahead of him. He could see the shell, sunlit and stubborn, occupying the place he had already claimed in his imagination. That hurt him more than the running. It was not just that he might lose. It was that he might lose to the very creature he had mocked in public. The one he treated like a lesson in weakness had become the lesson he could not outrun. Still, the tortoise did not look back. That, too, was part of the judgment. He gave no reaction, no acknowledgement, no mercy performance for the one rushing behind him. He stayed with the road and the line before him. One more step, then another. The finish line seemed almost within reach now, and the hare lunged forward with everything left in him. That lunge shook dust loose from the road, but it did not shake the one already at the edge of the line. The tortoise felt the ground change under him one last time. Firmer there, more worn, as if many hopes had passed over that strip of earth before him. The bright mark of the finish line lay just ahead, pale and steady in the heat. His shell carried the sun. His legs burned. His breath was small but true. Chosen one. This is the moment people never respect until they are forced to watch it. Not the beginning, when everyone is talking, or the middle, when pride is still comfortable, but this sacred moment when quiet faithfulness is one step away from becoming visible truth. Behind him, the hare stretched forward with all the force left in him. He was close now, painfully close. You could hear the rapid strike of his feet, the hard pull in his breath, the scrape of urgency trying to outrun consequence. But there is a terrible weakness inside late panic. It moves fast, yet it carries the weight of everything wasted. The tortoise did not have that weight on him. He had fatigue, yes, pressure, yes, but not regret. And that difference mattered more than raw speed ever could. The watchers stood frozen in their own realization. No one needed to explain what was happening anymore. The truth had stepped beyond opinion. The one they expected to fade had endured. The one they trusted to dominate was now chasing from behind, not from power, but from loss. Chosen one, this is how God answers rooms that misjudged you. He lets the evidence become too plain to argue with. He lets your life cross into a place where their old words no longer fit. The tortoise lifted another step, then another. No celebration, no glance back, just movement, patient and pure. The hare reached forward again, body almost throwing itself toward the same line, trying to close what should never have been left open. For one hot second, they were both near enough that the whole road seemed to narrow around them. And then the shell passed over the mark first. The race was finished. But the deepest blow did not land in the crossing itself. It landed in what the silence did to the hare when he realized exactly who had crossed before him. That silence did more than fill the air. It stripped the hare bare. He landed past the line a beat too late, chest heaving, paws unsteady, dust rising around him in little dry bursts. The same road that had once felt like his stage now felt narrow and unforgiving under his feet. He looked up and the tortoise was already across, still, grounded, breathing hard, but at peace. Chosen one. Defeat hurts pride most when the winner does not have to say a word. No taunt, no boasting, no need to explain what just happened. Truth standing there in plain sight is enough. The hare could not run from that. He had not lost to chance. He had not lost to trickery. He had lost while fully gifted, fully favored by the crowd, fully certain of himself. And that is the part that burns. Because when arrogance falls, it does not just lose position, it loses the story it told about itself. The one who mocked the shell now had to face that same shell as the proof of his own carelessness. The creature he had used as a mirror for weakness had become a mirror for his own emptiness. And the watchers felt it too. Their mouths stayed shut. Their earlier laughter had nowhere to go now. Some stared at the ground. Some stared at the one who had finished first. Some glanced at the hare and quickly looked away, because there is an awkwardness that comes over a crowd when judgment turns back on them. They had not only expected the fast one to win, they had helped strengthen his illusion. They had nodded at the mockery. They had treated patience like something small. Now patience was wearing the crown they had handed out too early. That is a hard rebuke, chosen one. When God lets someone you underestimated rise before you, the pain is not only in their victory, it is in the exposure of your own eyes. You have to reckon with what you celebrated, what you laughed at, and why you were so sure you knew who mattered. The tortoise remained calm, saying nothing. The hare stood there with the truth pressing against him from every side, from the road, from the line, from the silence, from the presence of the very one he had dismissed. And as the dust settled around both of them, another deeper realization began to move through the crowd. This race had become more than a race. It had become a mirror, and nobody standing near that line could avoid their own reflection in it. The tortoise stood a little beyond the mark. Dust settled on his shell, breath evening out, posture still humble. He did not swell with pride just because the truth had crowned him. That mattered, because the road had not changed what he was, it had revealed it. Chosen one. That is the difference between real authority and borrowed image. Borrowed image gets loud before the test. Real authority stays itself after the victory. The hare, on the other hand, had nowhere to put his eyes. The ground that had carried his confidence now held his embarrassment. He had mocked, rested, rushed, and still come up short. And the worst wound was not even the loss itself. It was the clarity of it. He could trace every step that led here. The challenge, the laughter, the shade, the sleep, the scramble. Nothing about this ending was random. Pride had written its own sentence and then been forced to hear it read aloud by the finish line. The crowd felt accused too, though no one had spoken a word. They had treated speed like a crown and patience like a costume. They had assumed the visible advantage meant divine approval. But now the one they had overlooked was standing in quiet honor, while the one they admired was learning humility in public. That is a hard thing to swallow, chosen one, especially for people who build their confidence by attaching themselves to whoever looks most impressive in the first half of the story. God has a way of letting the outcome expose what kind of eyes people are using. And the tortoise kept saying nothing. That silence became heavier by the moment. The kind that presses against a room when everybody knows the truth arrived before they were ready to welcome it. No excuse could soften what had happened. No quick smile could cover it. The line had already spoken. The shell had already crossed. The race had already judged the mockery without needing a single argument. But here's what made the moment even sharper. The hare was not standing in front of some stranger. He was standing in front of the very creature he had publicly reduced. The same one, the same shell, the same calm. And now that calm was unbearable. because it was no longer easy to call it weakness. It was beginning to look like something far more unsettling to the crowd, something closer to wisdom. And wisdom is exactly what pride cannot bear to look at for too long. The tortoise had not won by pretending to be something faster, louder, or more impressive than he was. He had won by refusing to abandon his nature. That is what made the moment so confronting. The shell, the small steps, the unhurried breath. The very things the hare had mocked were now glowing with meaning the crowd had missed. Chosen one, hear this carefully. Some people can handle your rise as long as they can tell themselves you changed into something else. But when your same quiet way becomes the thing that carries you into victory, it shakes them deeper than defeat ever could. The hare felt that shaking now. He could not point to some trick. He could not say the road was unfair. He could not even blame the winner for arrogance, because the one standing beyond the line had not taken a single cheap moment the whole way through. That is another judgment of heaven. When the person you tried to belittle refuses to become bitter enough to make your story easier. The tortoise gave him nothing to fight, nothing to twist, nothing to use, just presence, just proof. And that presence began to work on the crowd. What once looked ordinary now looked weighty. The shell ceased to seem like a burden. It looked like covering. The patient movement no longer seemed dull. It looked disciplined. Even the silence around the tortoise changed shape. Earlier they heard emptiness in it. Now they heard restraint. Now they heard peace. Now they heard a kind of authority that had never asked for attention and yet had ended up owning the moment anyway. That is how God flips the room, chosen one. He lets people stare at the same person they dismissed until they cannot deny what was there all along. And when that truth finally lands, it does not just embarrass the mocker. It humbles everyone who agreed with him. The hare stood with his breath still rough, eyes fixed on the one ahead of him, and the gap between them no longer measured distance. It measured understanding. One had moved with entitlement. The other had moved with reverence. One had treated the race like a stage. The other had treated it like an assignment. And as that truth settled over the road, something changed in the very feeling around the finish line. The victory was no longer just being witnessed. It was starting to preach. And once it started to preach, chosen one, nobody standing there could pretend this was only about speed anymore. The line had become a witness stand. The tortoise, still dusty and composed, stood like living proof that heaven does not always rush the one it intends to honor. The hare, breathing hard a few steps behind, looked like a warning written in flesh and fur. Gifted, admirer, and still undone by his own lack of reverence for the path. The road between them was now saying what no speech could improve. One creature treated the race like a promise. The other treated it like a possession. That difference is everything. Because the shell did not cross first by accident. It crossed first because it never broke covenant with the road. It never stepped away to flatter itself. It never confused early advantage with final authority. Chosen one, when God lets your life become evidence, He does not need to make you louder. He just lets people watch the distance between discipline and pride at the very end, when excuses have nowhere to hide. The hare felt that sermon in a way the crowd only partly could. He had lived inside the mistake. He had felt the comfort of the shade, the softness of false security, the sting of waking late. And now he had to face the exact result his pride had called impossible. The hardest part was this: the tortoise had not stolen anything from him. The road had simply refused to reward what he thought it owed him. That is a hard thing for arrogant hearts to face. They do not just want victory, they want victory to feel guaranteed. But the crowd was learning too. Their silence was not mere embarrassment, it was instruction. They were looking at the same shell, the same pace, the same calm they once overlooked, and realizing they had mistaken noise for favor. They had mistaken movement for maturity. They had mistaken confidence for calling. Now all of that had been corrected, without argument, without spectacle, without a single cruel word from the one who won. And that is why the moment carried such weight. The tortoise had done more than finish. He had exposed the whole value system surrounding the race. He had revealed what the crowd honored too quickly, what the hare assumed too easily, and what truth was willing to wait to prove. The air stayed still. The dust kept settling. The line behind them seemed almost holy now. And what remained was not another race, not another challenge, but a question hanging over every witness there. What would they do with what they had just been shown? What they would do with it, chosen one, was the same choice people always face when truth embarrasses them. Resist it or bow to it. The tortoise remained where he was, not claiming more space than he needed, not trying to squeeze extra glory out of the moment. That alone kept teaching. His victory was not hungry. It did not need the crowd to fix what they had said. It did not need the hare to collapse into speeches. It simply stood there, complete. The shell still carried dust from the road. The breath had settled. The work was done. And that quiet completion exposed something sharp. Real vindication does not chase applause after the finish line. The hare had to stand inside that exposure. He had started the race with a mouth full of certainty and ended it with nothing left to say. Every part of him had become a lesson. The laughter before the path, the comfort under the tree, the frantic rush after waking, the reaching too late. There was no hiding from the order of it. He had not been ruined by weakness in the tortoise. He had been corrected by weakness in himself. That is the kind of truth pride finds hardest to survive, because it cannot blame anyone else for the wound. And the crowd? They were being asked to choose as well. Would they still honor noise now that they had seen what it produces when it is empty? Would they keep calling patience unimpressive after watching patience cross first? Would they still hand out crowns in the opening stretch? Or would they learn to wait until the road has fully spoken? Chosen one, this is why God sometimes lets your process unfold in public, to lift you and confront every false measure in the room. The air felt softer now, but heavier too. It carried that strange calm that comes after a correction no one can argue with. The finish line no longer looked like a mark in the dirt. It looked like a dividing line between two ways of moving through life. One way assumes, rushes, performs, and wastes. The other honors, endures, listens, and arrives. Still, the deepest message had not yet landed. Because the race had shown what happened to the hare, it had shown what was true about the tortoise. But the final thing this moment was about to reveal, chosen one, was what all of it meant for the ones who had been watching from the side the whole time. And that last revelation would strike even closer to home. And the answer came without anybody needing to speak it first. The crowd did what proud witnesses always do when heaven has corrected them in plain sight. They went still. No cheering rose for the hare. No fresh laughter could be found for the tortoise. The air above the road was warm and quiet, and the only sounds left were the fading breath of the runner who came too late and the small, settled breath of the one who had already finished. Chosen one. That was the final indictment. Silence. The kind that falls when every false measure in a room has been exposed at once. The hare lowered his head, not because someone forced him to, but because there was nowhere left to stand inside the old story. The shade had failed him. The crowd had failed him. His speed had failed him. What remained was the road he had underestimated and the creature he had mocked. And the tortoise did not turn that moment into cruelty. He simply began to move again, not racing now, not proving, just walking past the line with the same plain dignity he carried from the first step. That, more than the victory, finished the lesson. The shell did not stop to collect everybody's opinion. It kept going. That is how truth leaves a place, chosen one. It does not always stay to argue with the dust. Sometimes it crosses, breathes, and keeps moving, while the ones who judged too soon are left staring at the marks in the ground, trying to understand how something they called small carried enough weight to outlast all their confidence. By the time the sun leaned lower, the deepest thing left on that path was not the memory of the nap, or even the loss. It was the thin line of footprints beside the dragged edge of a shell, continuing beyond the place where the race had ended, as if real honor had somewhere else to be. The road looked ordinary again after a while. A little dust, a little heat, a tree holding its shade. But one trail went straight on, calm and unbroken, and nobody there could look at it the same way. If this stayed with you, subscribe and stay with this space. Leave a quiet word in the comments if you know what it means to keep walking while others misread your pace.